What's up, chat? How we doing today? Went golfing this morning. Went to my first ever hole 9 course, not par 3. So was finally hitting the driver. Was not doing so well on the driver. I think that's one of my biggest flaws right now. Is definitely my driver game. Not to say I'm the best at any other clubs, but definitely still need some work. But let's get into it. Number 2. The next 3 chapters of Talking to Strangers are devoted to the ideas of a psychologist named Tim Levine, who has thought as much about the problem of why we are deceived by strangers as anyone in social science. The second chapter looks at Levine's theories through the story of Bernie Madoff, the investor who ran the largest Ponzi scheme in history. The third examines the strange case of Jerry Sandusky, the Pennsylvania State University football coach convicted of sexual abuse, and the first is about the fallout from the moment of crisis before the United States and Cuba in 1996. Quick reminder, Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Does anything about Admiral Carroll and the Cuban shoots dawn strike you as odd? There are an awful lot of coincidences here. Number 1. The Cubans planned a deliberate murderous attack on U.S. citizens flying in international airspace. It just so happens that the day before the attack, a prominent military insider delivers a stern warning to U.S. officials about the possibility of exactly that action. Number 3, and fortuitously, the warning puts the same official the day after the attack in a position to make the Cuban case on one of the world's most respected news networks. The timing of those 3 events is a little too perfect, isn't it? If you were a public relations firm trying to mute the fallout from a very controversial action, that's exactly how you'd script it. Have a seemingly neutral expert available right now to say, I warned them. This is what a military counterintelligence analyst named Greg Brown thought in the days after the incident. Brown worked on the Latin American desk of the Defense Intelligence Agency. His job was to understand the ways in which the Cuban intelligence services were trying to influence American military operations. His business, in other words, was to be alert to the kinds of nuances, subtleties, and unexplained coincidences that the rest of us ignore, and Brown couldn't shake the feeling that somehow the Cubans had orchestrated the whole crisis. It turned out, for example, the Cubans had a source inside Hermanos Rescate, a pilot named Juan Pablo Roque. On the day before the attack, he had disappeared and resurfaced at Castro's aside in Havana. Curly Roque told his bosses back home that Hermanos al Rescate had something planned for the 24th. That made it difficult for Brown to imagine that the day of the Carroll briefing had been chosen by chance. For maximum public relations impact, the Cubans would want their warning delivered the day before, wouldn't they? That way, the State Department and the DIA wouldn't wiggle out of the problem by saying that the warning was vague or long ago. Carroll's words were right in front of them on the day the pilots took off from Miami. So who arranged that meeting? Brown wondered who picked February 23rd. He did some digging, and the name he came up with startled him. It was a colleague of his at the DIA, a Cuban expert named Ana Belén Montes. Ana Montes was a star. She had been selected repeatedly for promotions and special career opportunities, showered with accolades and bonuses. Her reviews were growing. She had come to the DIA from the Department of Justice, and in his recommendation, one of her former supervisors described her as the best employee he had ever had. She once got a medal from George Tenet, the director of the CIA. Her nickname inside the intelligence community was the Queen of Cuba. Weeks passed. Brown agonized to accuse a colleague of treachery on the basis of such paranoid speculation was an awfully big step, especially when the colleague was someone of Montes' stature. Finally, Brown made up his mind, taking his suspicion to a DIA counterintelligence officer named Scott Carmichael. He came over and walked in the neighborhood for a while during lunch hour. Carmichael remembers of his first meeting with Reg Brown, and he hardly even got to Montez. I mean, most of it was listening to him say, "Oh God." He was wiggling his hand saying, "I don't want to do the wrong thing." Slowly, Carmichael drew him out. Everyone who worked on Cuba remembered the bombshell dropped by Florneto Aspeliga. The Cubans were good, and Brown had evidence of his own. He had written a report in the late 1980s detailing the involvement of senior Cuban officials in international drug smuggling. He identified specific senior Cuban officers who were directly involved. Carmichael said, and then provided the specifics. I mean, flights, the dates, times, the places, who did what, to whom, the whole enchilada. Then a few days before Brown's report was released, the Cubans rounded up everyone he had mentioned in his investigation, executed a number of them, and issued a public denial, and Reg went, "What the fuck? There was a leak." It made Brown paranoid. In 1994, 2 Cuban intelligence officers had defected and told a similar story. The Cubans had someone high inside American intelligence, so what was he to think? Brown said to Carmichael, didn't he have reason to be suspicious? Then he told Carmichael the other thing that had happened during the Hermanos Al Rescate crisis. Montes worked at the DIA's office on Bolling Air Force Base in the Anacostia section of Washington, D.C. When the planes were shot down, she was called into the Pentagon. If you were one of the government's leading Cuban experts, you were needed at the scene. The shootdown happened on a Saturday. The following evening, Brown happened to telephone asking for Montes. He said some woman answered the phone and told him that Anna had left. Carmichael says, earlier in the day, Montes had gotten a phone call, and afterwards she'd been agitated. Then she told everyone in the Situation Room that she had tried, that there was nothing going on, that she was going home. Reg was just absolutely incredulous. This was just so counter to our culture that he couldn't even believe it. Everybody understands that when a crisis occurs, you're called in because you have some expertise that can add to the decision-making process, and at the Pentagon, you were available until you were dismissed. It's just understood. If somebody at that level calls you in because all of a sudden those North Koreans had launched a missile at San Francisco, you don't just decide to leave when you get tired and hungry. Everybody understands that, and yet she did that, and Reg was just, what the hell? And Brown's thinking, if she really worked for the Cubans, why would have been desperate to hear from her? They would want to know what was happening in the Situation Room. Did she have a meeting that night with her handler? It was all a bit far-fetched, which is why Brown was so conflicted. But there were Cuban spies. He knew that, and here was his woman taking a personal phone call and heading out the door in the middle of what was, for a Cuban specialist, just about the biggest crisis in a generation. And on top of that, she's the one who had arranged the awfully convenient Admiral Carl briefing. Brown told Carmichael that the Cubans had wanted to shoot down one of the Hermanos Al Ascaded planes for years, but they hadn't because they knew what a provocation that would be. It might serve as the excuse the United States needed to dispose Fidel Castro or launch an invasion. To the Cubans, it wasn't worth it unless, that is, they could figure out some way to turn public opinion in their favor. So he finds out that Anna was not just one of the people in the room with Admiral Carroll, but she's the one who organized it. He looked at that and went, holy shit, I'm looking at a Cuban counterintelligence influence operation to spin a story. And Anna is the one who led the effort to meet with Admiral Carroll. What the hell is that all about? Months passed. Brown persisted. Finally, Carmichael pulled Montez's file. She had passed her most recent polygraph with flying colors. She hadn't have a secret drinking problem or unexplained sums in her bank account. She had no red flags. After I reviewed the security files and the personal files on her, I thought Reg is way off base here. Carmichael said, This woman is going to be the next director of intelligence for DIA. She's just fabulous. He knew that in order to justify an investigation on the basis of speculation, he had to be meticulous. Reg Brown, he said, was coming apart. He had to satisfy Brown's suspicious one way or another, as he put it, to document the living shit out of everyone. Because if word got out that Montez was under suspicion, I knew I was gonna be facing a shitstorm. Carmichael called Montez in. They met in a conference room at bowling. She was attractive, intelligent, slender, with short hair and sharp, almost severe features. Carmichael thought to himself, this woman is impressive. When she sat down, she was sitting almost next to me, about that far away. He held his hands 3 feet apart. Same side on the table. She crossed her legs. I don't think that she did it on purpose. I think she was just getting comfortable. I happen to be a leg man. She couldn't have known that, but I like legs, and I know that I glazed down. He asked her about the Admiral Carroll meeting. She hadn't answered. It wasn't her idea at all. The son of someone she knew at DIA had accompanied Carroll to Cuba, and she gotten a call afterward. She said, I know his dad. His dad called me, and he said, hey, if you want the latest scoop on Cuba, you should go see Admiral Carroll. And so I just called up Admiral Carroll, and we looked at our schedules and decided the 23rd of February was the most convenient day that works for both of us, and that was it. As it turns out, Carmichael knew the DIA employee she was talking about. He told her that he was going to call him up and corroborate her story, and she said, please do. So what happened with the phone call in the situation room, he asked her. She said she didn't remember getting a phone call, and to Carmichael, it seemed as though she was being honest. It had been a crazy, hectic day 9 months before. What about leaving early? She said, well, yeah, I did leave right away. She's admitting to that. She's not denying stuff, which might be a little suspicious. She said, yeah, I did leave early that day. She says, it was on a Sunday. The cafeterias were closed. I'm a very picky eater. I have allergies, so I don't eat stuff out of vending machines. I got there around 6 o'clock in the morning. It was about 8 o'clock at night. I'm starving to death. Nothing was going on. They didn't really need me, so I just decided I was going to get out of there, go home, and eat something. That rang true to me. It did. After the interview, Carmichael set out to double-check her answers. The date of the briefing really did seem like a coincidence. Her friend's son had gone to Cuba with Carol. I learned that, yeah, she does have allergies. She doesn't eat out of vending machines. She's very particular about what she eats. I thought she's there in the Pentagon on a Sunday. I've been there. The cafeteria is not open. She went all day long without eating. She went home. I said, well, it kind of made sense. What I didn't have anything. Oh well. Carmichael told Reg not to worry. He turned his attention to other matters. Anna Montez went back to her office. I was all forgotten and forgiving until one day in 2001, 5 years later, when it was discovered that every night Montez had gone home, typed up from memory all of the facts and insights she had learned that day at work, and sent it to her handlers in Havana. From the day she joined the DIA, Montez had been a Cuban spy. Wow. Very interesting. I think needless to say, that is someone who is good at their job. Probably way more than just doing, just being good at her job. Someone who's a chess player, someone who's strategically thinking every single step that she's doing, which is probably, in that profession or that industry is something that you probably have to do. at that level. Write down every single step that you did and remember it. But very interesting. I would love to know more about Anet Mentes. I'm probably gonna research her after this, but I'm gonna go eat some wings later with the boys. I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Peace.